Okay, for today's video, I'm going to be going through and replacing all of the hard lines in the car. This is going to be flaring and bending the hard lines to fit. To do this job, I wanted to spend a little bit of money and get the proper tools, so I picked up this flare kit from Eastwood. I have to say, after using Craftsman and Harbor Freight tools, this one is well worth the money. It made the flaring so much easier. I would definitely recommend picking this up if you have any brake lines to make. For the brake lines that I'm using, I bought 3/16 line. I got two 25-foot rolls of this copper nickel conifer alloy brake line. 50 feet total is way more than I need, but I just wanted to have extra on hand in case I made some mistakes. You can see I do have one line from a few years ago when I had a line rust out and I had to replace it in kind of a quick hurry. One thing, I left some of the lines in there from that old repair job. They were old and crusty, and I really couldn't get them loose. So without a lot of room, I just kind of left them there and routed around it. All right, so for this job, I had to go through and get all of the lines out of the car first. I'm going to be using the stock lines as kind of my template for how I want to bend the new lines going in. The lines are disconnected from where the calipers are, so I just have to break them loose from the ABS unit and then fish them out of the engine bay. Here's one. Here's the second line coming off. This popped up a couple times throughout the whole process, but I would say that this job is much easier done with the engine out of the car. You just have a lot more room to kind of get around everything, so I just had to move my relays out of the way. Here's the third line. There's the fourth line. I did make a little template just to make sure I knew which lines were kind of in the holders, like the top one goes where, so on and so forth. And one more to go. Should get the fifth line off now. Again, some things that might be unique to me. I have this catch can routed. So to get the long line that runs from that ABS unit along the firewall to the passenger side caliper, I really had to move that hose out of the way, as well as some of my harness. This is definitely part of it that would be much easier to do with the engine out of the car. So because I knew I wasn't going to use this line anymore, I just kind of bent it up to get it through the harness wires and out of the engine bay. Here's the four lines that I removed. The fifth one that was hooked up runs to the rear of the car and currently is still in there. Also figured I could take a couple minutes, get the ABS out of the way, and kind of wipe down this area. It's not perfect, but it looks a little bit better. All right, so here's my first line that I'm going to go ahead and make a new one of. I'm just using some cheap crafting ribbon that I had on hand to kind of measure out how long of a length that I need. So I'm running this along the line from the car, and then I'll be able to cut from my roll to size to match the ribbon. I'm sure there's other ways of mocking up new lines going in the car, but I figured this is what I had on hand and it was fairly easy to do. And with my line of ribbon cut, I can stretch out my roll of new line and cut it to the proper size of the ribbon. I will say that the material that my new hard lines are made out of, because it is easy to bend, it never really gets super straight. I don't really have anything on hand that I could figure out how to get it straight. So there are a few wobbles throughout that just, as I'm unrolling it, it doesn't get perfectly straight. And again, something else you want to spend a couple dollars on to get a good one of is our tube cutter. This basically just tightens around it, spins around a few times, tighten it as you go, and then it will cut your lines. You can see my old junky one on the left-hand side of the screen. And with my line cut, I just wanted to clean up the ends a little bit. So I have a cheap kind of Dremel tool that I'm using. Worked pretty well, and it was a quick job to do. Every line that I cut, I cleaned up both ends before going over and flaring it. And definitely remember to do this step before flaring. Make sure that your brake line nuts are on. For the flaring tool that I got from Eastwood, it just sits in a bench vise. There's a kind of a dial on the top that can be set to a bunch of different flare types. The first die that you set it to is just to get it kind of in a flat spot, flush with the, I guess, the holder that I just tightened down. And then after it's flat, I turn it to my bubble flare, I guess, die press, and then a nice even pull on the lever gets me a perfect flare. Flip the line around, get it flush in there again, tighten it down, turn the die to the proper one, and crank it back down. There's one line cut to size and flared. Now to bend it. All right, sped this one up. I think in total it took me about 10 or 12 minutes. I had a bit of a bending tool, but I really couldn't get perfect or as tight of a bend as I needed. So a lot of the times I was just doing it slowly by hand, kind of moving my hands along the radius of the bends as I went. One other thing that I kind of realized as I was going, all the bends aren't always in the same plane. So just because you have, let's say, a 180-degree bend, sometimes it'll flare a little bit into like a, I guess, a third plane of space. So I did use a marker to kind of mark, I guess, the outside of the bend, so I knew that as I was going to get that third dimension, I knew that where my mark was kind of on the outside of the bend, regardless of which direction I was going. I never tried it, but I think maybe putting the line in my bench vise and bending it from there might have helped. But the overall shape is pretty close to the line that's coming out of the car. And eventually everything did line up as needed in the engine bay. Here we go. Here's all of the lines removed and all of the new ones made. You can see I did get the overall shape, but maybe not the perfect proportions of the stock lines. The little ones for the brake master cylinder, as you might have seen in another video. Pretty hard to do just because it was such a small radius. This might be my best line. And with that, now it's just time to start getting all of these back in the car. You can see the reasons why I didn't really want to reuse any of them. The nuts were pretty chewed up for me trying to break them loose over the years for all the different changes that I've done. And they were just starting to deteriorate. You know, I had a couple lines, like I said, rust holes through them. So I just wanted to take this time and do everything now. Starting with what I think are the easier lines to put in. This one goes to the driver's side caliper. Getting these finger tight for now, and then once everything's in and routed properly, I'll go through and tighten them down. This next line is the brake master cylinder, I guess, proportion valve to the ABS unit. This is an early model E30. I don't know if all of them have this valve below the master cylinder. All right, this is the second line that runs from the brake master cylinder to the ABS unit. It was a pretty nice feeling to see all of the bends that I made come in and kind of clear most of the structures. There were a few around that strut tower that I had to bend a little bit more by hand in the engine bay. This is why I would say if I were to do this again, I might try to just bend them as I go and just keep test fitting as I work through it. You can see my lines here are nowhere near as tight and needy as the stock units, but I don't think we ever really expected that. And with that, that concludes me making all of the new hard lines for the E30.